All right. Thank you very much for coming. One of the main reasons why I'm here this morning is that I wanted to clarify the tax amnesty that we plan to introduce within the next couple of weeks. Now, let me first define what a tax amnesty is, because during the debate on the media review, quite strangely, the leader of the opposition asked, what is a tax amnesty? And just let me go back in time before I do that. Over the last 10 years or so, the government, various governments of Trinidad and Tobago, have granted tax amnesties as follows. In 2008, there was a tax amnesty between August 2007 and April 2008. In 2010, that would have been under the former PNM administration. In 2010, there was a tax amnesty between the 8th of September 2010 and the 31st of May 2011. In 2014, there was a tax amnesty up to March 31st. In 2014, there was a tax amnesty effective up to March 31st, 2015. In 2016, there was an amnesty, a tax amnesty, between July 2016 and September 2016. So if we go back in time over the last 10 years or so, we'll see there have been at least 4 tax amnesties. Now, what's an amnesty? A tax amnesty is a facility that allows the waiver of penalties and interest on outstanding tax liabilities for a specific period of time. So if we look again, let's look at the amnesty that was granted in 2016. That was from July to September. It was in fact just about 2.5 months, from the beginning of July to around the middle of September in 2016. The taxes that are eligible for an amnesty include the following: corporation income tax, individual income tax, health surcharge, value-added tax, insurance premium tax, insurance surrender tax, pension refund tax, supplemental petroleum tax, petroleum profits tax, unemployment levy, green fund levy, gaming tax, and the other taxes such as the online tax, the hotel tax, and so on. So this particular amnesty that we will introduce to become effective around the middle of June to the middle of September, it's a 3-month amnesty, will waive penalties and interest that may have accumulated or are due on tax liabilities for all taxes that attract penalties and interest. In the past, the tax amnesties have targeted different types of taxes, such as individual personal income tax, corporation tax. Sometimes it targets petroleum tax, value-added tax, etc. This particular amnesty will target all taxes that attract penalties and interest. And in the same way that there was a notice posted on the Ministry of Finance website back in 2010, and it's still there. If you go and look on our Ministry of Finance website, you will see it there. There is a notice with regard to the tax amnesty that was introduced from 2010 to 2011, and it says, to all individuals and companies who have not filed their returns of income for any year up to the year 2009, all interest on outstanding taxes will be waived if taxes are paid during the period 8 September 2010 to 31st May 2011. This includes business levy and green fund levy due and payable as at 31st December 2009. All interest charged on any payment made before September 2010 will be waived. All penalties, further tax and additional tax due and payable on outstanding taxes will be waived if taxes are paid during the period 8 September 2010 and 31st May 2011. And it goes on to give further details with respect to penalties for not filing tax returns, and so on. So we are going to waive all of the penalties for not filing tax returns of all types, and all of the penalties and interest associated with all of the taxes that attract penalties and interest. We will be publishing a similar notice on the Ministry of Finance website, but that would be around the time that we finalize the legislation, because we have to look at the year of income. It will most likely be all taxes due up to the 15th of September 2019, let me correct that. It will be most likely a waiver of penalty and interest on all taxes due and payable and not paid up to September 15th, 2019, but we have to finalize that. But I will publish the complete list of taxes where the amnesty will apply and the effective date in terms of the amnesty. Now, if you go on the Ministry of Finance website again, well, actually the Inland Revenue Division website, there is a question and answer link, and it answers a number of questions, like, for example, what is the tax amnesty of 2016? And the answer is there. There's a you press on the link, and there's a drop-down menu giving you the answer. So, for example, on the tax advisory notice right now on the Inland Revenue Division website, it says the tax amnesty of 2016, this is the one that we did, is a facility that allows the waiver of penalties and interest on certain outstanding tax liabilities during the period the 1st of July to the 16th of September 2016. Another question, which taxes are affected by the tax amnesty 2016? And the answer is there. You click on the drop-down menu and you get this answer. This amnesty affects the following taxes: income tax, including PAYE, corporation tax, petroleum tax, value-added tax, withholding tax, business levy, further tax, and additional tax. And then they actually give you a definition of further tax and additional tax. Then another question, which liabilities are waived under Tax Amnesty 2016? And the answer is, the liabilities waived are interest and penalties on outstanding taxes, penalties on outstanding tax returns. Another question, under what circumstances will interest on outstanding taxes be waived during the Tax Amnesty 2016? And it says interest will be waived where taxes or levy are paid during the amnesty period or on any of the listed outstanding taxes which are due and payable for years of income up to and including the year 2015. And it goes on, a number of questions and answers, which penalties will be waived. Again, they speak to the penalties due on unpaid taxes and so on. And it asks, will penalties be waived for not filing tax returns, and penalties on late filing? This is the answer. Penalties on late filing of outstanding tax returns will be waived where the income, corporation, and petroleum tax returns are filed during the amnesty period. So all of it is there on the Ministry of Finance website. It's been there since 2016, this question and answer, Inland Revenue Division. So I was a bit shocked when I was asked, what is a tax amnesty and how does it work? And actually an insinuation that does it mean that people don't have to pay tax? Kind of a ridiculous question. So it's allows people to pay their tax without penalties. So that's the amnesty. With respect to the mid-year budget review itself, I think what I can do now, having dealt with the amnesty, I can ask you if you have any questions on the amnesty, and then I'm free to answer any particular questions the media may have on any aspect of what I said during the mid-year budget review. So, over to you.
Excuse me. If you had said it before and I didn't hear it, you didn't allow the question. In terms of revenue from the amnesty, how much do you expect this time?
Okay, I saw that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I saw a comment in a newspaper about a day or two ago from an expert, someone that is, in Trinidad we have many experts. So they found an expert and they asked the expert, what is the revenue, what is the possible revenue take from the amnesty? And that expert pronounced that the revenue take or the revenue target from 2015 was not achieved. In other words, that the revenue target in 2015 was $500 million and we fell short. That's actually in The Guardian. Okay? I was a bit nonplussed because I thought to myself, I remember that we exceeded our target. So why would this expert be saying that? And the comment also was that the amnesty period is too short, that 3 months is too short. It should be 6 months. So 2 declarations were made. 1, we failed to meet our revenue target in 2016, and 2, the amnesty is too short. So I went back and I did some Googling and found a Guardian article, of all things, which reporting to the public that we had achieved $250 million more than our target. In other words, our target was $500 million. We raised $750 million. So that put paid to old talk number 1, that we missed our target in 2016. We in fact went over by $250 million. And then the amnesty in 2016 I'm talking about, was 2.5 months. And we raised $750 million. This amnesty is 3 months. So I have set a target of $500 million, as we did in 2016. It is quite likely that we will exceed that. We may very well have a 2016 repeat where we get $600-700 million out of the amnesty. It really helps in terms of budgetary support. It really assists in earning additional revenue for the government. But it's in context. Since we have laid the report of the Joint Select Committee on the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority bill in Parliament, it was laid just a few days ago, and we expect to debate that very shortly. We thought it was wise to try and clean up these arrears of taxes that are in the system so that the Revenue Authority can start with as clean a sheet as possible. I don't know if I've answered your question. Right.
Mr. Imbert, do you have any sort of statistics on the level of collection right now? Like how many people pay taxes? What's like the shortfall?
I don't have the actual numbers, but the total number of employed persons is over 600,000. But in 2016, we increased the personal allowance from 60,000 a year or 5,000 a month to $72,000 a year or $6,000 a month. What that meant is that any person earning $6,000 or less pays no tax, and there's no obligation on their part either to file a return. So you have to deduct from the 600,000 plus employed persons the number of persons who are in the 6,000 range and below, and it's about 200,000 from my memory, but I can get the exact figures for you. So you're talking between 300,000 and 400,000 persons pay income tax, but everybody pays value-added tax when they make a purchase.
And is there like a specific sector that you feel has, been not paying taxes? I know that,
there are informal sectors, persons who run businesses informally. So the businesses are not registered, and they don't file returns. They don't declare income. There are many informal businesses.
So how are you going to target this? I mean,
well, what's done in other countries is straight enforcement. I mean, if you are aware that somebody is conducting a business in plain public view and they are not declaring any income, then you go and you investigate that person. The problem now is that the system is so tied up with bureaucracy and very tedious and laborious regulations that it's very, very difficult for the Inland Revenue Division to do that kind of work in the manner that they should.
So, well, I guess the question is, are you dependent on goodwill then for people to just pay their taxes, or do you have a system in place?
When you say goodwill, what do you mean?
For people to just decide, okay, you know what, I should pay taxes, so I'm going to.
You mean at the present time?
Yeah.
No. The Inland Revenue Division collects a lot of tax revenue.
Yeah.
They do audits. They have inspectors out on the street on a regular basis. They visit businesses. They do enforce, but they don't have the modern systems that are necessary to enforce. So that's what the Revenue Authority is all about. They're stuck in some archaic methods. Yes, Mr. Wilson.
morning. What about professionals, doctors, lawyers, sole trading accountants, and so on? What sense do you have of the amount of taxes they pay, and also landlords?
Anybody who deals in cash would be someone who could be a potential tax avoider. Because once you deal in cash and you don't give a receipt and it doesn't pass through the banking system as income, then you can avoid tax. And that's one of the reasons why, in terms of different methods, the business levy and the green fund are there. I remember when Wendell Motley was Minister of Finance back in the 90s, he had gone to Mexico, and Mexico's society quite similar to Trinidad. And there were so many businesses not declaring profits. So you have all sorts of different types of tax avoidance. You have persons who declare income, but they don't declare profits. So you have businesses in business for 20, 30 years, and they're never declaring a profit. Now, how on earth can you be in business for 25 years? How could you remain in business if every year you're posting a loss? So what they did in Mexico is introduce these forms of taxation on your gross sales. So it's on the top. So business levy and green fund is on your total revenue, not on your chargeable profits. And that was the reason for that introduction. Because in that way, all businesses have to pay some form of tax. In terms of the informal sector where they're dealing in cash, you just need more vigilance, that is all. You need more inspectors. And let me just deal with that before you jump in, Mr. Williams. Right now, all of the staff in the Inland Revenue Division, bar a few exceptions, come through the Service Commission. And just like Customs, where we have hundreds of vacancies, there are also hundreds of vacancies in the Inland Revenue Division because of the very long and tedious process to employ people. I'm sure they have thousands of applications for vacant posts in the Inland Revenue Division and in the Customs Division. I'm absolutely certain of that. But the pace at which these vacancies is filled, very slow. So one of the other advantages of a statutory authority as opposed to a mainstream government department is that you would be able to get the kind of skill sets that you need, the kind of levels, the kind of numbers of staff that you need with the qualifications that are required. Okay?
Can we expect, let's say, double vendors, taxi drivers and so on, now be called upon to pay taxes?
But those are very emotional descriptions.
But there are people dealing cash.
Yes, I know, but those are very emotional descriptions. I would think that the Inland Revenue Division would go after the large tax avoiders first, rather than the smaller ones.
Who are large tax avoiders, you think then?
Businesses that deal in cash.
Okay.
Large businesses.
Groceries.
Mr. Wilson is answering your question. Okay. Ask him, he seems to know a lot.
Also,
He listed a whole range of areas where there is known tax avoidance. He's quite right.
Have we had in the last 10 years too many tax amnesties to the point where people say to themselves, I'm not going to declare my income because I expect a tax amnesty down the road?
That is always a problem that we face. That there is a belief that sooner or later governments, when they need cash flow, will have a tax amnesty. But the fact of the matter is that we're going into the new revenue authority, and we thought we would try and make it the slate as clean as possible. Because let me tell you something, there are billions of dollars held up in the tax appeal board. Because I don't know if you know the system. If a business is assessed, a business or an individual is assessed by the Inland Revenue Division, and they don't agree, because Inland Revenue will make an assessment of you and say you owe $1 million in tax, let's say, okay? And the taxpayer is entitled to disagree and challenge it and ask for review. And then they get the review, they could challenge the review as well. And it's a long, convoluted process. And this process can go on for 6 years. That's the law. So what you often find is that large taxpayers, they then go to the tax appeal board in the 6th year. So they end up arguing with the Board of Land Revenue for year 1, year 2, year 4, year 3, 4, and 5. And then in the 6th year, if you don't have your matter settled in the 6th year, you have to pay, or you can go to the tax appeal board. So you find a lot of the matters find their way to the tax appeal board in year number 6. So that's 6 years of people not paying their taxes. And then when it gets into the tax appeal board, it can take years inside of there as well. So you have matters that are stuck in the system, whether at Inland Revenue or the tax appeal board, that are in the billions of dollars. And what we found in previous amnesties, people withdraw their matters from the tax appeal board. They make a commercial decision that, look, I won't continue because my lawyers have advised me, even though I'm dragging this out, at the end of the day, I'm going to lose. And therefore, I'll have, and when you lose, you have to pay interest and penalties. So you find during an amnesty, quite a few people withdraw their matters from the tax appeal board and pay the taxes. And quite often you have settlement discussions as well between the Inland Revenue Division and large taxpayers, to settle matters that have been festering for years. Okay.
So then an amnesty does actually help clear up some of that backlog?
It does. It does. Mr. Brown.
You're satisfied in terms of just follow my colleague's question, in terms of the system and collection?
No, I'm not satisfied. I gave a report in the Parliament about a year ago from a tax agency called TADAT, that's an arm of the IMF, and they look at tax administrations all over the world, and they examined our Inland Revenue Division in 28 areas of compliance, including responsiveness to taxpayer queries, settlement of disputes, and so on. And we failed in virtually every one of the 28. There are 4 levels, A, B, C, D, and we got a D grade in almost every one. And what I found interesting is I laid that report in Parliament, I gave a statement in Parliament about it, and I put it on our website. And people don't seem to be aware of the deficiencies in our tax administration that were found by the IMF more than a year ago.
How is the RA going to improve tax administration?
Well, we have to target those 28 areas of deficiency, which is proper enforcement, proper response to taxpayer queries, efficiency, speed, that sort of thing. Okay, I think we exhausted tax.
Sorry, on the Revenue Authority, do you have the buy-in of the trade union?
I didn't get any resistance from the trade union per se, They want successorship. That's what the trade union has asked for. They've asked for the law to be amended, the bill to be amended, to make it similar to the HDC legislation. When the NHA was converted into the HDC, it was written into the law that the PSA and the NUFGFW would continue as the bargaining agent for the workers. That's what the unions have asked for, and then of course they asked for job security. And we've said categorically that everybody who wants to move across can move across, and anybody who does not want to move across, there are options like redeployment in the public service and that sort of thing. We haven't made a decision yet on the successorship issue. That decision will be made by the time the bill is debated.
And pensions will be transferred?
Yes, and pensions will be preserved. So whatever pensions they had in the public service, their benefits will be preserved until a new pension plan is implemented in the Revenue Authority.
Just to clarify, was the timeline for the TTRA?
Well, I'm hopeful within the next month we can debate the legislation. And as soon as the legislation is debated, there will be a transition period, obviously. It's going to take some time because you're talking about approximately 2,000 workers. It will take some time for them to be transferred. And in fact, one of the amendments that we made during the committee stage, and I can talk about it because the committee report was laid, is that we extended the time for persons to make up their mind whether they want to stay in the mainstream public service or transfer to the Revenue Authority from 3 months to 6 months. And we also put in a provision that the Minister of Finance can make a further extension to that if the need arises. Because you have to be realistic. It's 2,000 public servants that are going over, and it may take a little while.
Well, how long do you think this debate might last? Because, I mean, you have to get opposition buy-in, right? So, like, do you think it will, actually pull through?
I don't
will
expect.
It just be, like, tied up in
I don't expect a
bureaucracy?
long debate.
So you think, like, by next year we could start the transition to the TTR?
This year.
Calendar or fiscal?
Calendar. Well, you all are very tame this morning. I don't think I should have said that.
Because we watched the interview this morning.
Okay. So we could wrap up now then.
Yeah, basically. Just to, on like another note, if you can,
Yeah.
can you just give an update on the Caribbean Airlines? First, the plane that like crashed into the wall, what's the report on that? And also the Max 8 contracts. Have we what's
The
status with
situation with the plane that was taxied into the wall remains the same. It's being repaired.
that? Okay. No, I think in Tobago,
What we did, I can give an update. We had already planned to lease an additional ATR aircraft for the Tobago route for the summer period, the vacation period. We in fact started that lease for the Easter vacation, and that additional aircraft is already on the route and will be flying until September.
Okay.
But that one was a supplemental aircraft.
Okay.
When the aircraft was damaged, we recognized, look, we need to get another one, because we had planned to just get one extra to deal with the vacation demand. But then when this plane was damaged, we said, all right, we have to get two, so we have another one.
Okay.
So that there's going to be significant capacity on the air bridge, and the plane was fully insured.
Okay, cool.
So that we should be all right in terms of the cost of repairs.
All right.
With respect to the Max 8,
Yeah.
no decision on that yet.
Okay.
I mean, Caribbean Airlines is making sure it has options. It would obviously, if the Max 8 is not certified as airworthy, they can't accept it. That would be an event of default in the contract. In other words, the Boeing can't force Caribbean Airlines to accept the delivery of the planes if the planes can't be certified as airworthy. So that if Boeing does not sort out its problems with the Max 8, then clearly Caribbean Airlines can't take delivery of any Max 8 planes, and they would have to defer the release of the existing aircraft. They will have to keep the existing aircraft while they revisit the whole thing and decide the way forward. I don't anticipate any disruption, because they've already spoken to the lease, the lessors, the persons that lease the current planes to Caribbean Airlines. They've already spoken to them, and they're dealing with that dynamic, watching and seeing what's happening with the FAA in the United States and so on. Okay?
I'm going to say, mid-year review,
Mhm.
spoke about the issue of gas supply and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really hear from anyone else from the government a lot of details concerning the dragon gas situation.
Well, I think Minister Khan spoke yesterday, and I think he spoke in detail.
He spoke about, did he speak
On Wednesday, sorry, he spoke on Wednesday.
So in case I missed anything.
Yeah, I think he gave a comprehensive update on our energy supply situation. That's my understanding.
I meant dragon gas, specifically the Venezuela.
Well, the dragon gas situation remains pending. You know the situation in Venezuela, so that can't be concluded until the governance arrangements are resolved. So it just remains pending. But I want to make the point that dragon gas was going to give us maybe 200 million standard cubic feet. I find scuffs is a word that I find a little unusual. Not too much into these technology terms, but we were going to get about 200 million standard cubic feet per day from Dragon. And that is not a deal breaker. That would just help. That would help you to run an ammonia plant, a new ammonia plant or a new methanol plant. It would help to increase the throughput through the Atlantic LNG plant and so on. But it's not a deal breaker. 200 million standard cubic feet a day is 5% of our national production, more or less. So while it would certainly have helped us tremendously, and what Dragon was supposed to do as you go forward, it would be 200 million in the first instance, then it will grow to 300, 400 and so on, because The potential of that particular field is far more. But they were starting off with just 200 million, and that's what was programmed in. So the Dragon deal, as far as I know, I'm not the spokesman on this. I want to make that absolutely clear. But my understanding is that that's pending the resolution of arrangements in Venezuela.
Minister, in your presentation, you posited that there would be no impact on overall gas production because of the loss of the up to 300 million scf on BPDT.
All right, let me just deal with that. The information I have is that, and I mean this has been confirmed, the information I have is that we expect natural gas production in 2018 to average out still, as I told you on the last time we spoke, at 3.8 billion standard cubic feet per day for 2018, to average that. And I think BP has already confirmed that these issues that they're having at this time will not affect 2018 production. If the current situation becomes permanent, because it is temporary as far as I'm concerned.
2019?
2019. Did I say 2018?
You said 2018.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Thank you for correcting me. So that we expect gas production to still average 3.8 billion standard cubic feet per day in 2019, which is our targeted production. If the situation that was reported becomes permanent, in other words, if BP decides not to continue with its infill drilling program, because that is essentially all that has happened. They have an exploration program and they have an infill drilling program. The infill drilling program is in existing fields. So you will have heard the names Cannonball and Kashimi and so on. These are existing fields. So they were drilling wells inside of a field that already has wells in it. And the reason why I have to do that is the natural rate of decline of production in Trinidad and Tobago. That's our geology. So that a well will not continue to produce at the same level indefinitely. It falls off all the time. The one that is most stark in terms of that is the BHP oil field off of the east coast of Trinidad, somewhere off of Biche. The one where they had a discovery.
Of where?
Biche. If you take.
I think you mean Togo.
No, it's if you take a line through Biche going to the northeast, that is where the BHP well field is. That was the one that was discovered and brought into commercialization in 2005. They started off at about 75,000 barrels per day, and they're down now to about 6,000 barrels per day. So when it came into production, 75,000 barrels of oil per day was fantastic, but it just immediately started to drop down to 65, 55. So that's our geology. The decline in natural gas is nowhere as severe as the decline in oil. So if our oil well is producing 200 million cubic feet a day, it will not drop to 5 immediately, but it drops, but not as fast. So what these companies have to do is continue to drill inside of existing fields, new wells, to tap into new sources of gas within the field. And this is what that infill drilling program was all about. They are drilling inside of existing fields, as I said, Cannonball and Kashimi. And they do that based on a formula, based on a target, that we expect the production in this field to drop by a certain amount this year. So we're drilling infill wells to boost back up the production. And these two infill wells were not as productive as they would like. So it means that they have to revisit, they have to regroup, go back and say, all right, we didn't get the production that we expected here. How do we treat with this situation? Is there something else we can do? Can we drill somewhere else? You know, is there another source of gas that we can produce? So if it becomes permanent, because I don't expect it to be, I believe it's temporary. I believe that when BP goes back and it reviews all of the seismic data and all of the geology and so on, it may very well restart its infill drilling program, and therefore the impact may not be as severe as we expect, and that's why my estimate is 100, will drop by 100 million standard cubic feet a day. But the other companies are ramping up their production. BHP, for example, is ramping up its production. Shell is ramping up its production. Shell has done very well in the last couple of years. There was a field called Starfish. I don't know if you've heard about that. Starfish did not do very well. Starfish was almost a failure. But you had new arrangements at Shell, new directions in Shell, and they've been able to rescue that Starfish field, and Starfish production is now significantly higher than it was a couple of years ago. So when you look at the thing in totality, when you look at BP, when you look at Shell, when you look at EOG, when you look at all BHP, you look at all the gas producers, we do not think that this will significantly impact on gas production in 2020.
I just want to, hold on. I just want, because
wait, Mr. Hello. Is I say that, not you? You can't tell Mr. Wilson, hold on.
Yes, but
Mr. Williams, this is my press conference, Mr.
I
Williams.
understand that,
No.
but I'd like to follow up on my
Mr. Williams,
question,
I
because-
don't want you shouting at other reporters in my
well,
press
you gave quite a
conference.
circumlocutive answer, and I want a straight
Mr.
answer.
Williams,
So if you
Mr.
can
Williams,
tell me, if you can tell me,
before we
Minister.
continue, can we get some ground rules?
Sure, and that
I
you
do not
answer.
want you shouting at other reporters in my press
Minister,
conference.
I'm not shouting.
Okay.
I may have a heavy voice.
Right, okay.
Right. So what I'm asking you after that long answer,
Yeah.
are you saying then that you expect in 2020, we're not talking 2018, 2019, we're talking 2020 when BP has said it is going to lose up to 300 million scuffs. Are you saying that you think that the total average production per day will only decrease by 100 million scuffs? That is to say from 3.8 in 2019 to 3.7 next year. Is that what you're saying?
No.
What are you saying then? Because that's what you just
No, he
seem
was
to have
talking
said.
about 2019.
No, when he said, okay, if you can, so you're saying that it's going to fall by 100 million scuffs in 2019. That's what you're saying?
You finish your press conference with Mr.
No,
Wilson.
I'm asking.
This is my press conference.
Right, and therefore I'm here to ask the question. You're here to respond.
Okay, would you allow me to respond?
Well, I'd like you to, please go ahead.
Thank you.
Welcome.
There is a projected production for 2020, which is in the region of about 3.7 billion standard cubic feet, and I expect there may be a drop off of maybe 100 million standard cubic feet on that.
So you
That's the
down-
figures I have. No, it's not down. Those are the figures that I have. I have received figures from the Ministry of Energy, and the projections for 2020 are in the region of 3.7 billion standard cubic feet.
Okay, and if you're at 3.8 in 2019, then you're down by 100 million scuffs. Yes? We agree?
Mr. Wilson,
Okay.
Yeah, I think he does agree.
I would think so
Okay,
too.
so you went through maybe a list of 4 or 5 potential gas producers. Question is, can any one of those 4 or 5 step into the breach caused by the infill production problems that BP has had? Can any 1 or 2 or 3?
No, remember, I'm not the Minister of Energy.
Yeah.
So you're asking the Minister of Finance, who is not a geologist.
No, but this is a,
No, hold on.
it's
Let
a
me,
financial issue.
let me make my point. You're asking the Minister of Finance, who is not a geologist, to talk about whether other oil companies or gas companies can step into the breach and fill the void or the gap created by the issue with the infill drilling. I am not the Minister of Energy. I'm certainly not a geologist. I can only go on what I'm told. And therefore, I've been advised by the experts within the government and the Ministry of Energy that, yes, there are discussions underway with the other gas producers, and they can increase their production. Whether they can increase it to fully compensate for the projected decline of 100 or 200, or whatever it is, I can't say at this point in time. But I have been told that the other companies have already indicated that they will be increasing their production and they can supplement some of the shortfall.
Will that mean a recalibration of the Train 1 contract?
All right, now it's interesting you bring up Train 1 because Train 1, as you know, is quite an old facility. Yeah?
20 years.
It's 20 years old. And one of the things that the owners of Train 1 had to do this year was to modernize the plant. Remember, it's 20 years old. So there's a lot of old technology there. They would have done upgrades over the years from time to time. But my understanding is that they had to shut it down this year anyway, which is in the 3.8 billion calculation anyhow, to do serious upgrade and modernization of the Atlantic Train 1. Train 1 was the first one.
Yeah.
And you have to remember as well that first one, because we were new to this, because Trinidad and Tobago was new to LNG. In fact, it was new in the world at that point in time. In the first one, the investors got a lot of tax holidays and tax concessions. So the revenue take for the government from Train 1 wasn't that significant. The revenue take from the second, third, and fourth, Trains 2, 3, and 4, when you look at it, apples and apples for a molecule of gas, as they call it, put into Train 2, Train 3, and Train 4, and a molecule of gas put into Train 1, the revenue derived for the government from that was less for Train 1 than it was for 2, 3, and 4. So you take that situation where the revenue from Train 1 was not as good as the newer trains, and the fact the plant is old, and the fact that the shareholders, the owners of the plant, have to spend a lot of money on it, they were then asking BP to guarantee gas supply going forward. Now, my understanding of the gas contract, and this is with discussions that I had with the former country manager of BP, Mr. Christie, that going forward, they only wanted to give a 5-year gas supply contract. Yeah. So the previous one was 20 years, and BP, the way it was going, and this is in my discussions with him when he was here in 2017 and so on, was going forward, they would commit to 5 years. So that the owners of the plant had to make a decision. We're getting a 5-year gas supply agreement from BP, and we have to spend a lot of money on upgrading the plant. So one of the conditions for their shareholders, because remember it's owned by Shell, it's owned by a Chinese investor. There are all sorts of different shareholders in these various trains, NGC. So they have to now justify to their shareholders spending all of this money, hundreds of millions of US dollars, to modernize this plant. And it has to be based on a guaranteed supply of gas. So what has happened in all of this is that the shareholders now have to make a decision. Do they spend all that money modernizing Train 1? And to do so, they needed the gas supply contract. BP has now said they cannot at this time commit to the gas supply contract for Train 1. So therefore, the entire thing is on hold. But the effect of all of that is very interesting. Right now, Train 1 consumes about 490 million cubic feet of gas per day. The other trains consume around the same, 500 in the 500 million cubic feet range. The 2 and 3 are a little more, but Train 4 is the largest. Train 4 is consuming over 700 million cubic feet per day. So the other trains, 2, 3, and 4, they're newer. They provide a better deal for the government. And therefore, if for some reason everybody decides, all the actors, BP, the owners, decide, look, we're not going ahead with the continuation of Train 1, then what that means is a greater gas supply for 2, 3, and 4. And the average gas supply to the LNG plant now is about 85%. When you take all together, when you take its total requirements, 1, 2, 3, and 4, it's about 85%. And therefore, if you no longer are supplying Train 1, then you would be able to supply sufficient gas to run 2, 3, and 4 at 100%. So again, that is more revenue coming back to the state from the operations of 2, 3, and 4. And then you may even have some residual left over for the petrochemical companies. And you've heard in the past the experts say that Trinidad and Tobago gets more revenue from the sale of natural gas to the petrochemical companies than it does to the Atlantic plant. So when you look at the whole thing in its totality, that's why I say this is nothing to be alarmed about. Because if the gas goes to the other trains and goes to the petrochemical companies, the government might in fact get more revenue than it's getting now.
If we are to believe that those figures, Minister, then you are really talking about having, next year, let's say Train 1 doesn't continue, you are going to have an excess supply of 150 to 200 million scuffs. Because the installed capacity, bearing in mind that 2 methanol plants are down, is in fact about 4.1 million standard cubic feet. So if you take out 500 million from the 3.7, you're over by 100 million.
No, we'll be fine.
But those are the figures, Minister. Would you say then, where is that extra? What is going to happen to that extra 100 million scuffs?
I am certain that all gas we produce can be utilized.
And the other question I want to ask you is in relation
All right,
to...
Mr. Williams. There are other reporters in this press
Yes,
conference.
but
Could you make this your last question, please?
No, I can't because I'm
You can't?
No, I can't because I'm here to ask questions. If you want to end the news conference, it's your prerogative. But I will not be censored in that. So what I'm asking you, Minister, is whether or not you can quantify what the loss of 100 million standard cubic feet as your number is going to mean in total revenue coming to government.
As I just
As
said,
of 2020, what is the loss going to
Mr.
be?
Williams, you can't ask a question and answer it as well.
No, I just want
So
to make
just,
sure you're clear what
I've
I'm
got
asking.
the question, Mr. Williams. As I just said, that if the gas has to go to other trains and has to go to the petrochemical plants, I expect an increase in revenue, not a decrease. Any questions from this side of the room?
Change topic actually
Certainly.
on the HS.
Sorry, June, we'll come to you.
On the HSF, did a newspaper report that stated that the Heritage and Stabilization Fund,
Mhm.
that board does not have a quorum, seeing that several members 10 years come to an end. Any update on that?
Well, I didn't read the papers this morning. I haven't read the papers for the day because I was on the CNC3 program this morning at 6 o'clock, and I haven't had the opportunity to read the papers. But I got the gist of that article from someone. The best description I could give to that newspaper article is alarmist. That's the most charitable description I could give to it. It betrays a classic misunderstanding of how the Heritage and Stabilization Fund operates. The fund itself is managed by an investment firm. And this investment firm invests in equities and in short-term instruments in the United States. So it would buy US Treasuries, it will invest in the stock market in the United States and so on. That is a contractual arrangement between the Heritage and Stabilization Fund and the fund managers. The fund managers consult with the central bank because the Heritage and Stabilization Fund board has delegated its responsibility to the central bank to liaise with the fund managers to manage the fund, so that the absence of a board for a couple of weeks in no way could possibly, at any point in time, affect the management of the fund or the returns to the fund. It is only if, for example, the government wanted to do a withdrawal, that is where the board comes in. The board has to agree. So the government will make an application to the Heritage and Stabilization Fund board to make a withdrawal within the confines of the existing law. The board will examine the evidence, because it's based on estimates of oil prices and actual oil prices for the previous year. So the Ministry of Finance, and we've done this twice already, would apply to the fund and say we want to make a withdrawal. Our projections for the previous year were too high, oil prices were much lower, there's been a shortfall, we want to draw down on the fund. That's the kind of thing that the board gets involved in. If again there's a major global shock, like complete collapse of world stock markets and so on, again the board will get involved. But in normal day-to-day operations, the board might meet once every 2 months, not twice a year, once every 2 months, and they don't get directly involved in the management of the assets in the fund. That is left to the fund managers, which is a firm that has been there for years, plus the delegated authority to the experts in the central bank. So I don't know what that story was all about. I don't know what was the point of the story. I don't know what's the point they're trying to make. And in any event, Cabinet approved the reappointment of the Heritage Board several weeks ago. And the instruments are just going through the process through the Attorney General's office, the Solicitor General's office, the Cabinet Secretariat. And in fact, I was told this morning that the instruments are on Her Excellency's desk for signature this morning based on the Cabinet approval of a couple of weeks ago. So there's nothing to be concerned about. And that story was just alarmist, even bordering on the mischievous. Okay.
Were you making a financial case earlier about the possibility that Train 1 would be mothballed permanently, even though there are companies willing to supply gas to Train 1 in 2020 and 2021?
Let me make the point. The previous arrangements were not favorable for the government. That's not speculation, that's fact. And that's because Train 1 was intended to attract further investment in LNG. So the arrangements were very favorable towards the investors. Clearly, as we go forward now, we can't continue with that. So that the new arrangements that were negotiated, they're not finalized because they haven't been signed, no agreement has been signed, were far more favorable to the government. So that it all depends on what the shareholders want to do. If the shareholders agree with the new arrangements that give the government more revenue, if BP decides it wants to be part of that, then Train 1 will continue. If they all decide no, we don't want to continue with this because it's not in our commercial interest to do so, then the facility will not continue. But my understanding is we got a much better deal for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Much better deal. And while we're on that...
Maybe it was too good for BP.
Could be. And while we're on that, I want to compliment that empowered team that is headed by Minister Khan and has Minister Young in it, and also the permanent secretaries in the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Finance, and also our international lawyers, White and Case and Poten and Partners, our experts in oil and so on. I want to commend them for the fantastic work they've been doing. And that's my understanding, that the arrangements were far better for the country.
Is the empowered team likely to, in as far as you know, to reach agreement with Shell on 5C and 5D, which might be...
Mr. Williams, just hold it. I just want to, I'll come back to you. Could I get questions from this side of the room, please?
Mr. Khan in the Senate, if I'm not mistaken, spoke about the $3 per MMBTU based on the Henry Hub price, and that is no longer a hub of importing, but more exporting.
No, but the thing about Henry Hub, it's no longer relevant. You had those two, Lake Charles and Henry Hub, which were terminals receiving gas. Those are really imaginary reference points now, because our gas does not go there. When Atlantic started up, most of our gas went to the east coast of the United States. In fact, about 90% of it went there. The prices were excellent. I remember in 2006, 2007, the prices hit as high as $13 per MMBTU. And that's because you didn't have a network of pipelines and producing facilities across the United States that could supply gas to the east coast. But of course, that was then. That was 20 years ago. So that over that 20-year period, gas production in the United States has accelerated. The infrastructure is in, so that all of those users in the East Coast, whether they are power plants or whatever it is, whatever they were, they are now relying on domestic gas. They're not relying on imported gas. And in fact, the US is also exporting gas itself, having become a large gas producer. So our gas goes to the Far East, Japan, China, and so on. It goes to South America, Chile, and so on. And it goes to Europe, to Spain, and so on. And the prices in Europe and in South America and in the Far East are much higher than the prices, those artificial Henry Hub prices. So the price that we quote in the budget is a weighted price based on all the destinations that our gas goes to. And Mr. Williams, to deal with those questions, I'm not a member of the Empowered team, so I'm not in a position to give you any details on those negotiations because I just don't know.
But as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, I'm asking whether or not the government sees an opportunity to sign an agreement with Shell on 5C and 5.
All right, let me just make a few things clear. I'm not the Deputy Prime Minister.
The
Never,
acting Prime
never.
Minister.
I'm not the Deputy Prime Minister. There is no such post. I have never held it, and I'm pretty sure I will never hold it. So I'll get that out of the way. And secondly, if I tell you that I don't know about what Shell is doing with Block 5 and so on, you can ask me that question 3 and 4 times. The answer will still be, I don't know. I suggest you pose that question to those who know, which would be Minister Khan as the leader of the Empowered team. Any more questions from this side?
Minister, that Henry Hub price, is that obtained for the other 3 Atlantic Energy trains as well?
Unfortunately, when they negotiated all of those commercial arrangements, Henry Hub was used as a reference point. It would not be used anymore going forward as a reference point.
And another point, excuse me, another topic altogether. Automotive Dealers Association had representatives who were on our morning edition.
Okay, hold on. Mr. Wilson, one more from you, right? Is it one?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah.
That's a real one, right? Okay, let me just answer him and then I'll come to you. Yes, Mr. Wilson. And by the way, Mr. Williams, if there's any question that is within my expertise and knowledge to answer that you wish to ask
I know
me.
you know everything.
I don't. Yes, Mr. Wilson.
Oh, okay.
I don't. Who does? Not even Einstein. Yes, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, the question is really about the future of Train 1 and whether the Train 1 contract captured the destination prices that apparently has been...
It didn't. The original contract didn't.
No, the new one.
Oh, the new one is completely different. The new one would not be based on those artificial prices. Okay?
No, sorry.
And it's not a new one yet because it hasn't been
Right.
settled.
So my understanding is that the basis of the problem that the government has had with Train 1 for a long time is destination of the gas is Spain, but the gas gets diverted to Chile.
Correct. Well,
Price in Chile is much higher than the price in Spain.
totally correct.
And the government is getting a tax based on the Spanish price and not the
Mr.
actual
Wilson,
Chile price.
You have it down pat. You know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. So the question is, has the revised Train 1 arrangement, not agreement,
All right.
dealt with that issue
Hold
of...
on. Let me answer that in a
diversion?
particular way because I am not a member of the Empowered team. And I don't know everything, Mr. Williams, whatever you may think. Let me just deal with that. The mandate given to the Empowered team, and we've had tremendous support from White & Case, which is one of the best international law, oil and gas law firms in the world, is that we have to get a better deal, that we should not be pegging revenue to artificial prices. It should be based on actual. So the revenue to the government should be coming from what the gas is actually sold for when it reaches its final destination. But that's the mandate. What has been settled, I cannot say because I'm not a member of the Empowered team. You really have to pose those questions to Mr. Khan. Okay? Yes, Joel.
The automotive dealers or representatives there of the association were on our morning program, and they were saying they were wondering why the government has not been looking at increasing incentives in terms of hybrids and seemed to be more focused on CNG, saying that a lot of people are more interested, according to them, in the hybrid technology, and that is where the world is going. But for some reason, Trinidad and Tobago seems to be more focused, or it's the government rather, on a CNG network.
But that's a very self-serving comment. That's all. They have a market. The people that buy cars from them, obviously they want us to revisit our decision to remove the tax-free concessions on hybrid cars. That's all that's happening there. We had made a decision to encourage people to use fuel-efficient vehicles, to waive taxes on hybrid cars of a certain engine size. We lost $350 million in customs duty. $350 million in customs duty in 1 year because of that. So that is why we decided, look, we can't continue like this, because everybody was switching to 2000cc hybrids, which were exempt from VAT, duty, and motor vehicle tax. So the whole buying public in Trinidad and Tobago was switching towards the 2000cc hybrid. If we had continued with that, we'd ended up in a situation where we have no revenue at all, and therefore we can't run the country. You see, all of these comments are self-serving. That particular group is looking at it from their own narrow perspective. They want to sell cars, and they were very happy with the situation where these hybrids were tax-free because they were selling a lot of them, and obviously their business was doing well. But as a government, we can't look at things for one narrow interest group. We have to look at the country. And if the decision to waive taxes on hybrid cars of that large engine size was losing us hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue on an annual basis, which we need for old age pension, we need to pay public servants salaries, we need for GATE, for free tuition. There's no way we could continue with that, and there is no way we will continue with that. And I really don't understand why they keep saying this, because it doesn't make sense. If oil was $150 a barrel, if gas was $12 a MMBTU, if we were producing 200,000 barrels of oil a day and 5 billion standard cubic feet of gas, well, yes, we could do that, because we will be getting revenue from somewhere else. But right now, we can't. And I want to make the point that while the economy has turned the corner, we're still in a situation where we have to be careful. It's not as if there's milk and honey flowing. We have stabilized, we have turned, we're going up. The only way is up. We still have to be careful. So if we were to make a decision like that and just give up $300 million in revenue, that would not be a sensible decision. And I just don't understand why they keep saying this. They keep demanding that we waive taxes on hybrid cars.
Melissa, what else? Your question.
Hold on.
Minister,
Yes, and I think she has been trying for a long time.
Yes. So, property tax isn't coming on stream possibly for yet another fiscal year. Does this throw a spoke in the wheel for local government reform, seeing that, the funds collected from the property tax were supposed to go to the regional corporations?
But understand something. When that tax went to the regional corporations, what it would have done is assisted them with cash flow. Because right now, the regional corporations are funded by the government. Okay? So the government gives each corporation a subvention, whatever it is. It's the total is billions of dollars, maybe $3 billion. I'm not sure what the exact number is. So some corporations will get several $100 million in subvention. All of that comes from these other taxes we're talking about. Corporation tax, petroleum profits tax, value-added tax, custom duty on imported cars, and so on. So all of the money the corporations get, bar a few little dollars. They have fees for markets, they have fees for wrecking. It's small money, very small. But the vast majority of the money they get is by way of subvention. If and when the property tax regime came in, that's a revenue stream for the government. But what we were doing is saying that the corporations, that's yours. You take that. But what it would mean is that the subvention naturally from the government will be reduced. It's just like the Tobago House of Assembly. They collect taxes in Tobago. All taxes paid in Tobago, income tax, value-added tax, whatever, are collected by the Tobago House of Assembly, and they keep it. So what we do in the last 2 months of any fiscal year, in August and September, we do a reconciliation with them. So at the beginning of the year, you would do a budgetary allocation for the THA, $2.5 billion, whatever it is. But inside of there might be $100 million in taxes collected in Tobago. So at the end of the year, you do a reconciliation and you net off. And whatever the actual collections are, you adjust their subvention accordingly. Now, this is not to say that we would adjust the subventions for the corporations to the point where we would equalize it. So let's say a corporation is earning $30 million a year in property tax. We wouldn't reduce it by 30 million. We might reduce it by 15 million, which would mean they would get an extra $15 million to do the development works. That's just an example. But the beauty of the thing is cash flow, because the they would be collecting taxes all the time. This is the local government corporations. So they will have a revenue stream available to them all the time. And that's the whole point of that THA model, where they collect these taxes, so they have a revenue stream coming in all the time. It's not large, but it does help them to pay their bills. So that, yes, it will, to some extent, prevent us from full implementation of local government reform. But what we're doing is putting everything in place to allow that. Because to collect property tax, you must first have what is called a property roll. A roll is just a list, a register. So in that roll or register, you have the address of every property, the name of its owner, a description of the property, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, whatever, its size, what its features are, and its value. And you can't tax anybody until we complete 50% of those rolls for the various categories. So for residential, for example, the way the law was structured in 2009 was that you have to reach a certain threshold in terms of listing of properties in the official roll before you can implement the tax. And we have it now at 50%. So we have to assess, value, and record 50% of the residential properties before we can start to collect taxes from residential properties. So that's what we're about. It's a very tedious and a very laborious exercise, because there are 500,000 of these properties outside there. And each one is requiring a site visit, a physical, visit to the property to look at it, to make sure it is as it is supposed to be. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I just want to ask one last question, which is about the economy.
Mr. Williams, hold on. I'll give you the last question in the press conference. Let me just get this side. I'll give you the last one.
The 500,000 figure you gave is all the categories of property?
Yeah. 500,000 to 600,000. That's all: residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, etc.
And what in terms of the issue of squatting and so on, and people still building on state land without permission, that kind of thing, how do you factor that into the issue of the property tax?
It's the owner. The owner pays the property tax. But if you give a squat, if you regularize a squatter and give them a statutory lease, for example, then they become the owner. Because the owner is classified as the owner of the freehold interest, or someone who has a lease for the property.
But
Okay?
Those not regularized but still occupying lands either state or private without permission, how do you deal with that?
Well, they would not fall into the property tax net at this point in time. Okay? Well, what the valuation division is doing right now is going after the official list of properties. It's obviously much more efficient and easier that way. And then they will deal with that in due course at some point in time in the future. Yes, Mr. Wilson.
Has Cabinet considered the 10th actuarial review of the NIB, and is it planned to implement some of the records?
My understanding, it's been laid in Parliament. That's my understanding.
Yeah.
It had to go through Cabinet first to get there. We're looking at it. Some of the recommendations we would not implement at this point in time, such as a freeze an increase in the retirement age. That's not something that's a recommendation that's been there. And the 9th one as well, that we should increase the retirement age to the age 65. We are not implementing that. We have told the NIB to go and consult with stakeholders, and they have been having consultations. There are many of the recommendations we would not implement at this point in time.
What about the increase in the contributions?
Again, we want to try and avoid as many burdens on ordinary people as possible. So we're studying it. Of course, we have to do something. We can't bury our heads in the sand and say we're not going to do anything. But we're trying to avoid any onerous impositions on people at this point in time. Okay? I want to wrap up now. Mr. Brown, you had something?
Just final question for
Okay.
For me. For those, when you speak of the turnaround of the economy, I know you have addressed this on the morning program this morning. But those who may be struggling to make ends meet, or still not recognizing this as a turnaround,
Yes.
what do you say to them?
Well, that is not something that is like instant coffee. It's a process that will take some time. As a government, we will have to make sure that persons who are at the lower end of the income spectrum can actually experience the turnaround. And that's what we will be doing in this year. Okay? Right now, we're just looking at data. I mean, I know that's a question that's coming at us. The data says the economy is turning around. So we are going to be looking and seeing how we can make this turnaround felt by the ordinary man in the street. Okay? That's the job of our government. You can't just spout meaningless numbers. Nobody would take you on. So you have to now drill down and see how this turnaround can help people. But I'll tell you something. Once the economy has turned around, and it has, the GDP would increase, and therefore you get more revenue, and therefore you can spend more, and you can improve people's lives. Okay? So, Mr. Williams, last question to you.
I'm sorry, you do your thing. I'm good.
What to get more revenue?
I'm good. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.